what if the epicness that we sometimes spend our entire lifetime searching for exists not in spite of the boulders, but thanks to the boulder version of you, that these boulders inspire you to become? Often, when we least expect it, life thrusts us into the role of the reluctant shiro or hero in our own story. How we respond in those moments can be the difference between thriving or just surviving. We believe that our story will be determined by how we dare to answer one burning question: how to choose to live. Join us as we explore the mindset shifts, innovative strategies, and captivating stories from my own life experience and those of my truly epic guests. So let's get this started. Oh my gosh. So welcome to today's episode of the How to Choose to Live podcast. And we have such a juicy topic today. I cannot wait to share it because I'm sure there's no one out there who's dealing with this issue, right? So let me introduce my guest today. Her name is Cait Donovan, and she happens to be the host of her own podcast, which is called Fried, the Burnout podcast. She's an international keynote speaker. She's author of the book, The Bounce Back Ability Factor. Her creative burnout recovery solutions have been featured on podcasts like this one and online magazines such as Forbes, NPR, even the New York Post, and for companies such as Clorox and Pepsi. So, she knows what she's talking about. So, Cait, I am so excited to welcome you onto the How to Choose to Live podcast.
Meredith, thank you so much for the invite. It's always such a joy to do things like this, and I am a little bit in love with not only your glasses, but your ability to hold a conversation like few.
Well, thank you so much. And I confess that I am super excited about this conversation because one of the things that I hear, well, actually, there are two things that are two parts of, I think, this conversation. One, um, the people who haven't quite found what that epic purpose in life is, and they followed the path. They've done everything right, right? They've listened to all the input and they put one step in front of the other, and either they're not where they thought they would be right now, or they're exactly where they thought they would be and they don't feel what they thought they would be feeling. And then there's the other spooky version of that, where people have found something that they feel like is their passion, and yet they still get burned out on it. So before we get ahead of ourselves here, dear listener, I tend to do that sometimes. So let's explore a little bit. Cait, share with us. We talk about boulders, right? We all have them. Some, in the case of my daughter, are actual literal boulders that drop into our lives and dramatically force us to ask new questions and change everything that we thought that we knew. And at the beginning of that process, it can feel very much like disruption and like I have to figure out how to go on in spite of this. However, there also comes a time when we're fortunate, for many of us, where we look back and we go, oh my gosh, it's not in spite of that boulder. It's thanks to that boulder that I am living a life that I love. So share with us, if you would, a little bit about your boulder.
My boulder was, or I thought was, burnout.
Mhm.
And it's my main topic. It's what I touch. It's the only thing I've talked about really for like 8 years. So it's
Mhm.
something I know a lot about, something I've dug into. And for a long time, I thought that's my boulder. I burnt out and then I figured out how to get through it. And then I was about 5 or 6 years into recovery. And I had been a business owner at that point for, gosh, now it's been 17 years. So 12 years I had been an entrepreneur. I've done all the marketing classes and all the sit down and answer the question about your, perfect avatar of a client and do the, I've done all the things. So I was at a conference and they said, we're going to ask you to find like your main goal, your main thing that you talk about, and I'm thinking, I know mine already. Mine is burnout. And it got me here and it created this business for me and it did all these wonderful things. And I'm on that side already that says, thank goodness for that burnout because now I'm here and that's great. And so we're going through this exercise and I'm kind of doing it half-heartedly because I think I already know everything,
Yeah.
right?
No one listening to this has ever been there, Cait. You are the only one.
Right? So I'm being a little like cocky in my head and I'm sort of half-heartedly doing the exercise and then I wrote down the problem that I solve isn't actually burnout, it's self-neglect,
Ooh, wow. Wow.
right?
Yeah.
Even when I say it now, my whole body just went into goosebumps.
Yes. Which I, by the way, call truth bumps.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So I stopped at that moment and I realized that the boulder that I had been carrying was a pattern of self neglect that was created in childhood in response to trauma
Hmm.
and in continued because of societal encouragement.
Mm.
I,
Yes.
I was told I was good for it. Every time I put somebody else first, I was told I was a good girl. I got
Yeah.
attention for it. I had a lot of friends. None of them helped me, not because they didn't want to. A lot of them, I had friends sit me down and say, "I would love to help you. Could you ever talk to me about a problem?" And I'd be like, "What do you mean? I don't have you have the
Right.
problems and I solve them. I don't have problems. What are you talking about?" And I I just stopped when I wrote that down and I thought, "Oh." And I first went through the this is my fault sort of thing, right? Which is not really true. And then I went down the societal thing. And that led me to this idea of, one of my biggest fears, which won't
Mhm.
happen now, but
Yeah.
one of my biggest fears at the time I realized was dying and having my obituary be, she was so sacrificial. She gave up everything for everybody. She basically didn't exist so that other people could be happy. Because
Yeah.
that is the go-to obit for the people that we love, the women
Yes.
in
Yes. Yes. Yes.
particular
Yes. Absolutely.
that we love the most.
Absolutely.
She gave up everything for her children. She sacrificed everything for everyone. She never did anything
Right.
for herself. Why is that the
Right.
goal? Why are we celebrating that?
Right. Absolutely.
Right? So
Absolutely. Absolutely. And setting it up. Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, Cait, I can't say yes loud enough. I mean, it is men, it is in their variation of
Yeah.
their masculinity. I have to be the protector.
Yeah.
That is my identity. That is my worth. That is my value. And to your point, for women, I'm a different generation than you, and yet I remember vividly having it tattooed onto my soul that the women who were admired, uh, I was encouraged to model myself after, were exactly that. They're women who their identity was, what have you done for someone else today? And if you haven't done something for someone else, what have you done for your house today to make sure that it is impeccable? Because you are the cleanliness of your house. You are the sacrifices that you have made for those around you. And it is shocking because those same women, I don't think would intentionally abuse like their children,
No.
but they're one of the biggest abusers of their own inner child, to your point. And it's interesting because what cried out at me from what you just shared, and by the way, thank you for sharing that, because I know that there's someone out there who is going, "Oh my gosh, this is exactly what I needed to hear today." Um, I think that it's interesting because I had a similar moment not that long ago where I realized that because I had been a single mom all my life, I had been like you, an entrepreneur for decades. Um, all this stuff, I defined myself kind of like a Valkyrie, right? Someone who is, I am out there solving problems. I am out there overcoming obstacles. And that is who I am, which left an invisible part of the story said, so therefore, if things weren't tough for you, you would have no idea who you were. So better make sure that things are tough, right?
Isn't that incredible? You
Yeah,
can't be a warrior if it's not difficult.
right, right.
Yeah.
Right, right. So Cait, when you had that reveal, and I love how again what you also point out to everyone who's listening here is that the self-growth, this personal unfolding, it isn't like a diploma that goes on our wall. Right? It's this beautiful fluidity. It's the river, not the mountain. And even the mountain is changing, just a little more subtly. That's why the
Yeah.
boulders fall.
And I think there's this idea that this is constantly unfolding. This is what is Glennon Doyle Melton calls this brutal, right? It's
Yes.
brutal and beautiful
Yes.
because it is this beautiful unfolding. And oh my goodness, sometimes I wish it would stop. And and sometimes I have to take a break like from myself because I can't do this all like you can't do it all the time.
Yeah.
It can be exhausting and it can be invigorating. And I think this is another thing that's complicated in our society. There's, in the past maybe 15, 20 years, a lot of pop psychology has said things like, you can't be angry and have gratitude at the same time. Yeah, I can. I'm
Yeah.
a complicated human.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, yes,
Uh,
actually, I can. Brains are more complicated than only being able to do that one thing at one time. Like,
yes. Yes.
we're more
Yes.
advanced than
Yeah.
that. So I think we have to remember that multiple things can be true simultaneously. I had shifted away from burnout and started taking care of myself in a completely different way than I ever had before, and I had grown exponentially. And there was still a huge hole of self-neglect that sat there that I didn't even know about
Yes.
because I wasn't looking at it, because it wasn't on my
Yeah.
radar, because I thought that I had that sort of,
Yes.
arrogant idea that I had it all figured out already, right? And I didn't, and I still
Yes.
don't. And
And
but
and and I want to insert here what
yeah.
is between the lines here is a myth that I think many of us fall prey to, and I should be able to figure out the important things on my own and
Mhm,
look at what it that unexpected moment at that event that you probably your quote unquote goal was probably something entirely different at that event.
mhm,
And as is often the case, it's that combustive effect that it has and positive disruption
mhm,
often to kind of get messy with other people, and whether it's coaches or mentors or just even people who challenge you. I say sometimes we learn even more from the anti-mentors in our lives because of the clarity that comes with them than we do from the actual mentors. So pardon me for hopping in at that point.
no, no.
I felt like this is, I mean, when we can get out of our own way by believing that we have to figure out all of this stuff on our own in order to be considered smart or worth it or whatever the heck, successful, whatever it is to have that self-esteem, that is such a wrong path in my experience.
Well, and it's important to understand that part of self-neglect is not allowing other people to help.
Boom, boom.
So that was part of my self-neglect. That was part of the story. Not only do I have to figure it out by myself, but also if somebody helps me, then it's not real. I didn't
Yes,
earn it, right? There's not enough sacrifice. It's not difficult enough. I'm not a warrior.
yes,
I didn't earn it. And also, once I get there, wherever I think there is at the moment, right?
right,
If you're burnt out, then it's, recovered from burnout. If you're whatever it happens to be,
right,
right? Remission, blah, blah, blah. That there's not anymore, there's a false belief that once you get there, there's no more layers.
right, right.
The layers don't stop, folks.
Right, right. I mean, I equate it to, just shifting it a little. Like, again, a lot of people think if you're watching this visually, I'm like making a sine wave, right? And they're like, they're ups and downs and ups and downs. And because, we live in a duality, right? A world that is filled with dualities. That said, why look at it as a west to east sort of thing? Why not think of it more like this being, you are the boat. You can't miss the boat because you are the boat. You just have to learn how to captain it. And what does a boat do? It goes over the waves, and part of moving forward is that the waves go up and down and up and down. But it's still forward motion. And when so much of how we experience our own life, I have come to discover, is what we think about it, the
Yeah,
thoughts, what we make it mean in our
yeah.
hero or shero story.
Well, and this is something that Alexis Pappas, she's an Olympian, talks about that her coach mentioned to her. She had a really crappy training day one day, and she said, "Oh, I just had this really crappy day, and I'm not getting the numbers that I need in order to get the race time that I need in order to, And she was kind of getting down on himself, and he said, "Well, but it fits into the rule of thirds." And he was an Olympian himself, so she decided to listen to him, and she was like, "Well, what do you mean?" And he said, "Well, if you have a goal and you're on a path, a third of the time you're going to feel real great about it. Like you are crushing it. You're doing all the right things. You're in a flow. Things are good. A third of the time you're going to feel pretty neutral about it. You're going through the motions. It doesn't feel good or bad. You're just doing it and maybe wondering, should you not, and sort of wavering and whatever. And a
Mhm.
third of the time, if you're doing your goal correctly, a third of the time is going to feel crappy.
Yeah, yeah,
And
absolutely.
this is a terrible, difficult thing for, I think, especially Americans, as I've lived in a few places, but especially Americans to accept because we have this value of happiness that it's
Yes.
so hard for us to accept that part of the path, even when you are on your way to the right thing, part of that path is ugly, is uncomfortable, is but and he said he continued and said, if too much of the path is uncomfortable, then you're pushing yourself too hard. If too much of your path is happy, then you're not pushing yourself hard enough.
Yes.
If too much of
Yes.
your path is neutral, then you're not at the right goal.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's beautiful and profound. And I think um, it's interesting because I think that sometimes when we do the work or do the play, right, of evolving, I kind of crack up when people said, "Oh my God, but it's so hard." And I'm like, okay, wait a minute. Is what you're feeling right now, the stuckness, this like, ugh, epic often arrives disguised as, to use your word, ugly, right? As a boulder. It arrives disguised as the impossible. And so it is the beauty of dis discovering, having the aha moments that started out as those really ugly moments. And one of the things that makes me really think of Cait is there were a couple of really ugly warrior moments in my life that just really felt unnecessary and unfair. And I knew intellectually I should feel very grateful for them and I should forgive these people. And I was like, I am not forgiving them because that excuses them. No. Heart was like, no way.
Yeah.
And so I remember sitting in the cathedral, a little tiny, more like a chapel in the hospital in between shifts when my daughter was in the ICU. And I was there because it was one of the most calm, beautiful little environments in this crazy
Sterile,
environment.
noisy. Yeah.
Yeah, yes. And I sat in there, and it was almost like one of those aha moments got beamed down to me
Mm,
because those two experiences in particular that were impossible to forgive, much less feel grateful for, all of a sudden made sense. And it
mhm.
was like, oh my gosh, if I had not felt the depth of the agony and angst that I felt when I went through that experience, I would not be the mom who sits right here, who discovered the books, found the mentors, ask new questions, let go of maybe some things that were not serving me well. Oh my gosh, if I had no clue how valuable those horrible experiences would be for me then, who am I to judge this moment right here, right now, just because it, quote unquote, to my human heart right now feels pretty horrible? Right? And that was big, and that helped me begin to shift my programming so that when I would encounter these disruptions, these painful moments, instead of immediately going, "Oh my God, here we go. This sucks," it would be like, "Okay, there's a clue. There's a gem in there somewhere. Where is it? Where are you?" Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, and I think the only trouble with it is that you can't get there until you get there. You can't get there for other people, right?
Mm.
So, having that
Mhm.
experience and knowing that that can happen and that you can live that way and that it feels better, even though there's still angst and difficulty and whatever, you can live it differently. Until someone has that transformative space themselves, everything that you just said sounds like BS to them.
Yes,
Until.
until though, even so, here's, I mean, and this is, and I love what you just said. That's fabulous because th- I believe that's one variation
Yep.
of what can be true.
Mhm.
But to your point, that's the variation. If and don't get me wrong, as you hear this, when you're inadvertently on autopilot and you have not yet made the decision slash commitment to be the sovereign of the one resource that I believe is our most valuable resource, and that is our inner game. So it take I think you can, quote unquote, get there one of two ways. And one, yep, the big boulder drops, and you decide, what the heck am I going to make this mean in the context of my life, my future, who I am, etc. or who you, to your earlier point, who you believe yourself to be, who you've told yourself over and over and over, this is the way I am wired. I would beg to differ. You have never lived this moment. I don't care what evidence you have in every moment before this. I don't care how many people tell you, well, that's just the way you are. I would say, pardon my French, but bullshit.
Mm.
Making a transformation is as easy as making a new choice. But you do need to have guidance of how to get there and how quickly you get there, and whether you need a frickin' boulder to drop on you depends, from my experience in my own story, not to mention, like you, having coached hundreds of people, how willing you are to say, you know what, maybe I don't know everything. Maybe it is in my best interest to say, what can I control? What can my mind believe? And what might I be assuming that is not necessarily true? And guess what? Because they've had this delicious person like you, Cait, has had your own incredible realm of experiences. Maybe I don't have to have that freaking boulder dropped on me to learn which questions maybe I should be asking, and to take ownership of being the sovereign to say, virus protecting my mind right now. You are not a thought that empowers me. Thank you, but go sit over there. You know what I mean?
I do, and I think that the one of the things that I've learned through burnout research is that there are ways that we are raised, things that happen to us while we're growing, things that happen to our brain development as we age that prime us to be able to do things easier or not. And there are some people who have varying degrees of development in certain parts of their brain that make these things either accessible or nearly inaccessible. That doesn't mean it is inaccessible to them, because there's always a chance that we can get in there. But I think what's important to know about the physiology of the brain and the function of the brain is that not everybody has the same access
Right.
to these things. So some people, and I would venture to say, I would love to say that most people don't need the boulder,
Yes.
but that hasn't been my experience. Most people have a boulder at some point, right? Like, most
Sure.
people do
For
need
sure.
to be pushed to an extreme to start asking the questions, and there is brain science to support why people function that way. So, I think it's okay. I think the boulder's okay.
Oh, I love that. I mean, I love that, Cait. And I think, in fact, if you are committed to ultimately living a life that feels epic, now I'm not saying go out and intentionally get a boulder to drop on you, but I'm saying that is part of the deliciousness. There are
Yeah,
two dance partners for a reason. There are those moments that are so wonderful that they take your breath away, but there are
yeah,
also those moments that are so agonizing that they knock the wind out of you and you don't know if you'll ever get up again. It is
yeah.
those moments, ironically, when the dust settles, that more often than not, we are at our most creative, our most focused. We let go of a lot of the crap that we have been using to let us play
That
small.
part.
Yes.
This is what I think the boulder does. In addition to falling on your head, it clears the path of the expectations of all the things that we were just talking about this recently, because a friend of mine, their child got ill, and all of a sudden, nothing was important.
Yes.
right? So it clears the path really quickly. Priorities become priorities like this. Your
Yes.
true priorities, not the ones that you pretend you have every day, not the ones
Yes.
that you absorbed from society, not the ones that you,
Yeah.
and it's okay that you absorb them from society because every single human that exists did that too.
Right.
We all do
Right.
that. That's just
Yeah.
normal. That's how we function. But it takes that one thing to create a pathway that you look down and say, oh, shoot, not that. None of that matters. People that
Yeah.
couldn't quit, a lot of times in burnout specifically, there's people have made a commitment to gritting through a job or a situation that really doesn't suit them.
Yes. Yes.
And they think if they pretzel themselves enough, they'll be able to manage it. And they can't. And
Right.
it's not really any fault of their own, except for this doggedness that they have that says if I can just keep pushing through,
Right.
and eventually their muscles fatigue and they fall and they can't do it anymore. And this when that's the situation, that's not always the situation with burnout, but when that's the situation, part of the solution is removing yourself from the environment. But there's so many things attached to the environment. It's the financials, it's the
Yes.
status, it's
Yeah.
the identification, the self-identification with the job.
Yeah.
There's so many things, so many reasons for people to fear making the choice. But
Yes.
that's the thing that stands in the way of the progress sometimes is unless the boulder comes, they don't make the choice
Yes. Yes. And kind of to our earlier point, you take yourself with you wherever you go.
everywhere.
So in order not to say, well, I get my significance
Right.
because the world doesn't, I never get treated right. I'm
Mhm.
always the one who's overlooked.
Right.
That's who I am. That has been my destiny. Guess what you're going to create at the next place that you go? And so it's exactly, I mean, to your point, yes, remove yourself, but yet realize that that's only part of a coping mechanism that is not the solution at the end of the day. It goes
Yeah.
more deeply.
Yeah,
So
of course.
share with us, Cait, um, what are, say, some of the first things that you would tell people based on not just the science, but the experience that you have, which goes back significantly? Speaking of significance, what do you say to the person who is battling a bunch of fears? The fear of, I'm afraid I'm going to be one of those crotchety 75-year-olds who looks back feeling like I don't even know who I am and I never truly lived. Or I'm afraid that I'm going to do something dumb and I'm going to leave something that's secure and regret it later. What do you say to those people?
So first I think I like to review the sunk cost fallacy,
Okay.
right? Which is this idea that I've put so much into this that now I can't let it go because it cost me too much. And if I let it go, then I'm not getting my value back from it. So this is especially true for people who over-identified with their jobs because they studied a certain, like lawyers and doctors and people that spent a lot of time and money on school only to realize that they, like you said in the very beginning, like they are not where they thought they were going to be, or they are where they thought they were going to be, but it doesn't feel like they thought it was going to feel.
Right.
Right. So being addressing the fact that even in the financial world, the sunk cost is a fallacy. The sooner you get yourself out of something, the less it costs you over time. And so speaking from it from that perspective sometimes is helpful because it gives people the opportunity to look at it in numbers or in something that's not so emotionally charged to say, hey, in this situation, this is how we talk about it, just to open some perspective. So I think that's number one. Number
So
two,
number one, just to clarify, number
yeah,
one, shifting from looking at things, the return on investment for the ROI to shift it to the COI, the cost of inaction.
amen.
Okay, perfect.
Nailed it. Right.
Perfect.
So I think that is really making that very clear is critical. And then the next thing that I play with is something called the worst case scenario exercise. And what will happen? So what if you make a dumb mistake? Then what? And then what after that? And then what after that? And after that, what happens? And after that, what do you do? And what are you going to choose then? And if that's true, then what? And over and over again until we get to the point where you've figured out a path through the crap,
Yes. Yes.
right?
Yes.
You
Yes.
faced it. You looked at it. You know what it is. You know what could happen. And you know if that happens, how you'll get out of it. So there's
Yeah.
not really too much to fear because you already have a plan. The thing that helps us with the emotion of fear is a sense of control.
Yes. 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 And I think to embellish on that as well, one thing that I have found when people feel a little bit stuck because their mind is stubbornly just paralyzed,
Yeah.
basically paralyzed by the fear, is to start by saying, is it reasonable to assume that there is someone out there who is exactly feeling what you would like to be feeling, who at some point in their past made a dumb mistake, a choice that didn't turn out to be the choice, who is feeling exactly what you're either feeling right now or what you're afraid of feeling? And are they lucky? Do you think they were luckier than you are? Are there this? So if you can't find it within
Yeah.
yourself, start by saying, is it reasonable for my mind to believe? So what can my mind believe? Is it reasonable to believe that someone felt as fearful as I'm feeling right now, and they ultimately went with it, and they are exactly where I would love to be someday. So
That's a great way
bravo.
to look at it.
I love that. Okay, so now that was two. What's next?
The next thing is for me, especially when it comes to burnout, because you can only see so far in
Yes,
burnout. You can
right,
you can't see 10 steps ahead. It's not always feasible. So for
right.
me, the next question becomes, what is the smallest viable movement? What is the
Mm,
smallest viable step that you can get, that you can take, that will allow you a win, that will allow you the next most viable movement? And then what's the next most viable movement? But we can't usually get beyond two or three
right,
because you're not going to know what the next viable movement necessarily is. It's much
right,
easier to imagine all the stuff that's going to go wrong.
right,
Right?
for
The worst
sure.
case scenario is real easy to imagine.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
the
yeah.
the better case scenario, what's the next right step, the smallest thing that I can shift now that puts me 1% closer to where I'm going?
Yes,
And then
yes,
what's the step after that? That's 1% closer to where I'm going. And what's the step after that? And when I get there, I'm going to ask those questions again. And when I get there, I'm going to ask those questions again. And when I get there, I'm going to ask those questions again,
yes,
over and over and over again. I think one of the things that people, because the boulder is such a, like you said, like this massive disruption, people often assume that the solution is as disruptive.
yes.
And most commonly, it's not.
Exactly. I love it. I love it. I love it. And notice, you who are listening to this or watching this, the 1%, we talk about the power of the one, and we're not talking about you solo, just 1%, and the compound interest, the compound impact of 1% done consistently will be life changing,
Yeah.
and yet achievable, and
Yeah.
your mind can believe is possible, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. I,
Exactly. I think that going on that idea, there's a, we talk about foundational self-care in my
yes.
practice. And for me, so foundational self-care is pee when you need to pee, drink when you're thirsty, eat when you're hungry, rest when you're tired, right? Like react, your job is to have a bodily response, a bodily sense of information, and you are supposed to respond to it. That's how you meet your needs. That's the most basic level of it. And if we're not doing that, then there's a lot of other things that we can't do well. And what I learned, I had been talking about this for a couple of years, and then I learned that when you do these things on a regular basis, when you practice them intentionally, there's a function in your brain called interoception that increases because you're doing these things. And
Mm.
then when that increases, without you doing anything else, you automatically improve your emotional regulation. Without thinking about emotions, without doing anything with
Yes,
about emotions, without this is that compounding interest. I'm asking you to pee when you need to pee, and you end up being able to manage your relationship and your conversations with your daughter or son or whoever better because you have better emotional regulation because you decided to listen to your body's signals. It's absolutely like this should blow your mind if you're
yes,
listening that this is
yes,
possible. Not
yes,
everything has to be addressed directly. Sometimes the simple things make
yes.
huge impacts that we don't even realize they can make.
And think of the invisible story that you're creating, that you're writing as the hero or shero in your story when
Yeah.
you do just that. Because what you're communicating at a cellular level, literally, is that you're worth it. You matter.
Amen.
You're valuable,
I've
right?
got your back. I'm
Yeah.
here for you. I'm listening. I'm
Yeah,
responding.
and you are a priority.
Yes, you
You
are
are
worth
the
my
priority.
attention,
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
right? This
Yes.
is what came out of the realization that the problem I was really looking at was self-neglect.
Yes.
This was the other side of it.
Yes. Yes. And it's so funny because it it is this huge like mic drop moment of, oh, so that's why when I feel a little off when I'm not again, not peeing when I need to pee, not saying, "Oh my God, I'm thirsty. I'm gonna
Mhm.
take a drink." It's the subliminal messages that you are communicating to yourself. And when you start making that a habit, who you are and what you bring to the table shifts. So, therefore, if you see yourself as some valuable, worthy being having your human experience, of course, your tendency to show up as that epic version of yourself, empowered, purpose driven, innovative, collaborative, is more likely to be front and center than if you're someone who you don't even give yourself permission to pee when your body is saying, hello, I've got everything else, just I need to pee now. And you're like, nope, nope, sorry.
2 more email let me just finish this
I
email,
know. Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
You pulled out
Exactly.
the point of that exercise beautifully.
Aw, thank you. Thank you. Well, I mean, it's interesting because I think that one of the things that you've also touched on is something that is near and dear to my own heart, the language, including the invisible stories.
Yeah.
After a certain point, we just talk and we think and we and the our words and our stories do go on to autopilot. They take on
Mhm.
a life of their own, which we mistake as being
Truth.
the same, oh, well, truth, but also our identity, who
Mhm.
we are.
Mhm.
And often they are not. I mean, case in point, I think if you're listening to this, chances are you're going to answer a yes to this. Have you ever had a song stuck in your mind that you hated? Now, correct me if I've gotten this wrong, but if any mind should know which mind likes this song or that song, it should be your own. And therefore, if your mind's total wiring, quote unquote, is to only feed you what you like and what makes you feel your best, then it's not going to feed you that song. Clearly, that's not your mind is like a jukebox, and it's kind of, and this goes back to our, committing to becoming the sovereign of your own mind and saying, guess what? Just as I quarantine some of the things that come into my computer, if they threaten the system, I'm going to quarantine that statement. I'm going to quarantine that phrase because it does not help me show up as the epic version. And guess what? Who needs permission? I need to give myself permission. If I say I don't need that thought, I don't need to think it. Does that gel with you?
The only thing that I think is important is this idea that like we have a negativity bias in our brains
Yes,
by nature. So
yes,
it's okay. Like I like to explain to people when they're building their own self-grace and their own
yeah,
self-worth that it's not bad to have that like initial thought that's kind of garbage. And you
yeah,
don't even have to quarantine it, I don't think. You just have to say, "Oh, that was my first thought. What's my second thought gonna be?" This
yeah.
went viral for it was a fourth grade teacher. Her name is Ryan Brazil, and
Yes,
she made this video about first thoughts, second thoughts, and
yes,
it's a
yes,
really
yes.
simple concept, right? But it's this idea of like you are not the sum of your first thoughts, and your first thoughts are designed your brain isn't prompted really designed to make you happy and satisfied. Your
Right,
brain is designed to keep you safe. That's it.
right,
So if your brain decided that this statement is going to help you be safe on on some plane, your rational mind can overtake it and say, "Well, that doesn't really fit." But you can be really generous with yourself about having that initial thought because you're human and you're having a human experience, and
yeah,
that's a natural expression and reaction to a situation. Like I was driving in California one day, 12-lane highway, you know. I'm driving down
yeah,
the highway and I'm like I drive kind of like fast and I was like
yeah,
22. So I was probably going 85, you know. And so I'm 22 on the Californian highway cruising along and a car flew past me. And I was really cruising.
yeah,
And my first thought was what a jerk.
yeah.
And my second thought, I was doing a round at the children's hospital at the time, working with children that have cancer and their parents. So I was treating the parents for stress and the children for side effects of chemo and radiation, etc. My second thought was, what if that person just found out that their kid got taken to the hospital in an ambulance?
Right,
That was my second thought. My second thought was much more generous than my first.
right,
And
right.
I had to have that moment with myself. But if we dismiss or sort of judge ourselves for that first thought, I don't think that
Yes,
we're doing ourselves any favors, right? It's like,
agreed.
oh,
And
this is
yeah,
human. And
yes,
now what do I want next? What's next after
yes.
this?
And I love the clarification that you brought there because I think it, to your point, it is never the goal to only think positive thoughts,
Yeah,
right?
it's not possible.
Even if it were possible. That is that goes back to epic often arrives disguised as the freaking impossible and the
Exactly.
boulder. So
Yeah.
it is learning to have the agility
Mm,
to assess one, is this a thought, not unlike the song in the jukebox, that I've just heard over and over again? So therefore, I kind of equate it as part of who I am, or I'm repeating it. It pops up. It's like, oh, let's give Meredith a thought because she's not deliberately thinking about something else. Boom, here we go. And
yeah.
to realize that you have a say in which thoughts you give traction to.
Mm,
So that clarification that you just gave is so, and this is why we go further together than on
yeah.
our own, because your clarification drew out something that in my brain was like, well, that's a given. Of course, you're going to have those thoughts, right? And but
Yeah.
it's a pushback, it's a resistance that our minds would naturally have saying,
Yeah.
well, well, shouldn't I get to the point where I don't have those messy, nasty enemy, my own worst enemy sort of thoughts? No, they're there
No.
for a reason. They help you create. But choose.
Yeah.
Choose. Again, it goes back. You cannot miss the boat, but you do have to captain it, right?
Yeah.
If you don't want to get tossed by the waves. So I
Yeah.
love, 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 love that clarification. So, oh my gosh, Cait, I could go on forever with you. You are so interesting. And I just want to acknowledge that real sweet spot that you've created between that real organic kind of intuitive knowledge eh, fused lusciously with that scientific knowledge that you have. And it's a real sweet spot,
Thank you.
just wonderful. So thank you for sharing that with us today. So since you've listened to some of my podcasts, you know that at the end, I always ask my guests three questions. And so the first one is to imagine that now we're hundreds of years in the future, and for whatever reason, access to some of those gems that would help we human beings decide how to choose to live, they're gone. And now they're depending on you to share three starting places to consider as they weigh their own path of how to choose to live. What would those three things be, do you think, for you?
Number one, always ensure that your foundational self-care needs are met. This is your basis for a healthy physical life and a healthy emotional life. That's number one. Number two, pay attention to where resentment creeps in. Resentment
Mm,
is your guide to every single place in your life where you are self-neglecting. Every single
mm,
time. And it is additionally your guide to every single relationship where the boundaries are off center.
mm,
So, number one, foundational self care. Number two, resentment. And number three is there is nothing more powerful than viewing yourself with compassion and grace.
mm. I love it. I love it. Those are so, so powerful. And, if you're listening to this, I would even encourage you, come back, but pause this for a moment and sit with that because it's definitely thought-provoking in a really luscious, beautiful sort of way. So thank you for that. So, second question, and welcome back if you did pause this. Second question would be from where you sit right now, what could you look back upon your life right now that would allow you to say, you know, mission accomplished?
The podcast is my favorite thing I ever created. And this is going to sound silly, but the glasses.
I love it.
The
I love
glasses, the glasses, because for me, my sort of icons in life for how to stay lively are Iris Apfel and Prue Leith, and these
it.
older women who just are like, no, color, please, more, please, extra, please. And I never wanted to
Yes.
go beige. I don't want to go beige.
I love it. 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 Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh, you are inspire me. Are you ready? I am going to show you one of my favorite little playthings, which has never been seen on this podcast. Yeah.
Ooh,
Another first. Are you ready? Aside from the
yes,
eyeglass leashes,
which I
which
love.
thank you. And if you're watching this and you also love it, they just might be available on the podcast website. Check out these little babies.
They're
Ooh, ooh,
amazing,
ooh.
right? I mean, this is
Yes. Yeah. I love
my
it.
collection that I leave up here so I can change
Ah,
if I'm in a different mood.
yes, yes, yes. Totally a woman of my own
Yes.
eyes.
So
I
fun.
call them the real eyes. That helps me realize a lot of the inner truths, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, beautiful. Final question, Cait, is if you were to discover that the big boulder to end all boulders will be dropping at some point over the next 2 years, what is one thing that you would still want to be sure that you start doing, maybe even accomplish, what might that be?
To me, this is about health maintenance. Because no matter what happens, the stronger I am health wise, the more resilient I am to manage it, whether that thing is a health thing or not, right? The more I do to care for myself, I think this is my first job always. The good food, the movement, the
Yeah.
breathing, the time, the all of the sunshine, etc. To me, this is first and foremost making sure I was healthy so that no matter what comes, I can say I've got this.
Ooh, I love it. I love it. I love it. So if you're watching this, I know that you are going to want to hear more of Cait. So, Cait, share with us, first of all, where can we get your incredible book? Share with us that, and then dance your way into where people can find you on social media and this incredible podcast of yours.
So the book is The Bounce Back Ability Factor. It's available on Amazon, so it's super easy to find. And otherwise, I think the fastest and easiest thing to say is Fried the Burnout podcast. You can add .com at the end, or you can type that into anywhere you listen to podcasts. You will find it. From there, all the links and all the things will be visible. And we're almost at 300 episodes now, which is wild.
Ooh,
It's wild. And
who
so
knows?
that's the best place.
I love it. I love it. It's fantastic. And of course, we'll have all of those links in the show notes. So be sure you go and explore them. Also, speaking of which, be sure you stick around for the bonus tip at the end of this. And I know that at least one or two of the gems in this episode is going to make you think of someone that you know who needs to hear this. Go ahead and hit the copy button, the share button, and send it to them. Leave us a comment. Let us know your thoughts, what popped out at you. And of course, subscribe to the podcast and stay in touch with Cait, stay in touch with me. I'm Meredith Alexander. Cait, thank you so much for sharing such incredible wisdom here. And all of you, I look forward to seeing you next week. Booyah, baby! Cait is wonderful, isn't she? I knew you would like her. So, are you ready for your bonus tip, your action step today? The 1% that will hopefully start you on your path to moving even more forward, even more quickly. So, for this bonus tip today, I want to hone into one of the very last things. Again, she did quite a few exercises. She mentioned quite a few exercises that I would really encourage you to explore. However, for this bonus tip, I really want to hone into that resentment piece. And I'm going to encourage you to take a pause and really sit down and ask yourself, what do you resent? What sort of behavior, when it is directed your way, do you really resent? Is there someone who embodies this behavior or who maybe knows how to quote unquote push your buttons or trigger you? What is it about their words or their behavior that you resent that hits a delicate spot? And as you start identifying those, I am going to encourage you to ponder even more deeply, how might that be a clue to areas that you yourself have been neglecting within yourself? Some of that, not just self-care, but self-love. So today, your bonus tip, your action step, your mission for the day is to get out there and start cleaning up some of those things that you resent. Because remember what we said, the boulders, they can be clues. And that epic that we sometimes spend our entire lifetime seeking often arrives disguised looking like the impossible. So, I'm Meredith Alexander, your host today of the How to Choose to Live podcast, and I look forward to seeing you in our next episode. And don't forget to share, like, and subscribe. All right, see you soon. Bye.